details. But on testing and accountability, you know, the previous budget was 18,000 and now it's 38,000. You had additional wages at 1,000, it's now 4,500. I know they're small numbers, but when you're looking at 110% and a 350% increase for what small budget, those things start to add up. And sorry, and just that's page 6, items 2 and 4.
So in testing accountability, Maureen Margovich runs our testing accountability office. We've made adjustments at the last 3 or 4 years in a row. So I'm very confident in the numbers. Can you describe which lines you were looking at again?
It says clerical support. It says item 2. It went from 18,000 to 38,000.
Right. So we've added a half-time position there. We've always had a half-time clerical support for the testing office with the increase in testing responsibilities. Between the state and the feds, they continue to add testing accountability responsibilities. We've needed to add a full-time secretary to that position.
Okay, and then what would the additional wages be?
The
Yeah.
additional wages is actually, we're just moving the money from the temporary employment to the additional wages. Currently, we have an 11-month teaching position that works some additional time in the summer, working on testing and reporting to the various governmental agencies.
So if you look on line 3, you see a negative 3,500, and you see it drop down to line 4.
That's perfect. Thank you. There was on page 8, item 18, and again, these are just the questions. We got instructional assistance. It's a 215% increase, $194,000. And then the pre-K, which of course I understand that, $455,000 there.
Right. So that's that expansion of the 18 IA positions that we had to do mid-year.
Okay, that clarifies that. The total gifted and talented program, I see a $90,000 decrease in budget.
Yeah, we've right-sized that because we were using money. Eric, can you help us out on that? It seemed like we were using PD from somewhere else, professional development from somewhere else, so we tried to right-size that amount of the money, is what I'm recalling off the top of my head. You're looking at page 12, Commissioner?
Page 12, yeah. And it seems like, you know, a majority of that, 105,000 of that is coming from supplies and materials.
Right.
If you look, do you have on the second page of the summary where we had the 3-page summary?
So that's going to be right in front of page 1 of the 41-page document.
And if you slide down to about the middle of the second page of that 3-page summary, we have a total gifted and talented programs, a reduction of 92,500. And if you just slide down a few more lines to professional development, which is if you look at lines 33, the main transfer of what we're doing is the needs of the gifted and talented program. They were doing this transfer regularly in the past, and we're just adjusting the budget to carry it forward due to mandatory training for AP and IB and GATE programs. Basically, it's a right sizing of the budget, moving it from the G&T page to professional development.
So your net really is a $17,000 reduction in gifted and talented, but it was a $75,000 transfer from the gifted and talented over to professional development.
That's still given to the gifted and talented teachers.
Yes.
Because what was happening in the past, we were coming to you on quarterly adjustments sometimes to make some of these transfers, and we're just trying to get some of those things in the right places from the beginning of the year.
So again, I'm just trying to get clarification.
Nope, not a problem. Not a problem.
Same thing on page 13. We have a 91,000 decrease in librarians, but it doesn't look like on the top that we're removing any positions.
So several places in the budget you may see reductions. That's a salary line. So the first step every year for us in terms of getting to the salary point is right-sizing the budget from the year prior to the current year with what are actual salaries. So based on retirements and new hires, we're actually realizing a $91,000 reduction in staff salaries.
So probably 2 senior
That's what I assumed.
librarians retire. Yep, you'll see that in almost all the salary lines. It almost always that turnover credit that changes.
And guys already talked about the guidance counselors, I think 10 for $441,000.
Right, so that would be the significant increase there.
And can you explain the balance transfers in the special education? I know in the previous meeting, we were talking about how that's going to become a significant increase in special education because of the opioid crisis and everything, but we're seeing a 0.18%, and it looks like we're moved some money from special education teachers to additional summer school, instructional substitutes, things like that. If you could kind of explain that. Sorry, that's page 17.
The teacher salary changes are purely just like you saw back on the guidance
Just
section, just
retirements.
adjusting for the staff that we currently have. And then the other adjustments are just trying to right size to the needs that we know are there.
So so no teachers are losing jobs, just retirees and new teachers. And
Correct. If you look above where we're talking about the
Yeah, it says no
positions,
teachers,
it's not
yeah.
changing.
But then it's saying we're hiring 8 instructional assistants.
Yes.
Okay, and so that 8 instructional assistants is both the summer school and the instructional substitutes?
Adjusting the summer school and instructional subs is more, we're just increasing that to fall in line with the historically what we've seen the need be. If you look back at the actuals in FY18, we're bringing the FY20 budget closer to the actuals of the most recently completed year.
So our instructional substitutes, you can see that 517 back there in FY18. We're budgeted in FY19 at 444. We're probably going to exceed that. So we're just right sizing that to the 555.
Same thing, if you go back the year before, it was 243 and 363, so there's definitely been a major fluctuation.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand this greatly, but I just want to kind of get where we're going with this 11% increase on the next page, page 18. The special placements. Just as full disclosure, my wife works at Marshall Street, so we know very well about this. But the special placements is, I'm assuming this is just your normal fluctuation of students that are going in and out.
Yeah, we do our best estimate every year of that. We've had years where we've added money during quarterly adjustments. We've had years where we've taken money away in quarterly adjustments. Just depend upon the run rate. We generally run roughly about the same number of students that are in private placements, but some of these placements are, 30, 40,000. Some are as much as 100,000. We have one student that requires a full-time nurse. Mm-hmm. So there's just a whole variety of things that just by the change of just a need of 1 or 2 children will drive that number significantly.
And then I've got another question here on page 27. It just says equipment for $400,000. It's a 72% increase under technology support and maintenance. Mm-hmm. Is this in would that be in the operational budget? Or should we be moving that more over to your capital improvements?
So the way the state does our equipment, anything over $1,000 is considered a piece of equipment. Anything under $1,000, even though it looks like a piece of equipment, is a material. So these are items that cost more than $1,000. Large part of this is the servers and things that need to be replaced to keep up with our, our technology backbone, our camera system, those types of things. As we've looked at the sustainability of our technology plan in order to sustain the one-to-one plan, this is kind of a right sizing of that we think will take us into what we can foresee for at least the next 4 or 5 years.
Then a very similar question on page 29 has building renovations for $750,000. Page 29, item 12.
Right, so that's consistently been probably the budgeted number we have there. In some years past, that whole area just kind of moves to where we have the need. If we had situation with bleachers last year. We had to go through and do a lot of safety repair on bleachers. We transferred numbers out, we transferred money out of a line like that into bleacher seating, things like that. So those, again, are just very rough numbers. HVAC, roofing, all those things are just very rough numbers, and we transfer money back and forth in those categories significantly.
And while there's a significant increase in that one line, the entire net of contracted services in that grouping is a reduction of 17,000. That particular building renovations, if you go back to FY16 and FY17, was in excess of $2 million. So if we were handling projects perhaps that should have been of a capital nature that were coming out of our maintenance department budget, that's where those items would land.
And back when we had a significant amount of Thornton money, Dr. Morgan at one time put a great deal of money in there, and unfortunately over time we've had to rob from maintenance to balance our budget. So that's where some of that's happened 3 and 4 years ago. Again, if you look back to what Mr. Prue just indicated, we were running almost $3 million in 16 and 17 in that one line item.
Oh, and that's what I'm saying is when I'm looking at this budget, if you go back 2016, your total, contracted services almost 7 million. Then 2018 we're at 4.3, 4.4. So I'm trying to get a line of this budget.
It's not a lack of need. It's just we can't afford to maintain those lines and meet the rest of the needs of the system based on the funding we have.
So then the last question I have on the budget, as right now, as on the last page, page 32, employee benefits, we again have a new line item of $4 million under resource pool.
It's not necessarily a new item. That's a spot we put every year the amount that is planned by the Board of Education for salary increases to staff to all 3 of our bargaining groups. So again, as we hit the actuals in the prior years, that money is floated into the individual line items where that salary is incurred. For the sense of the budget, we keep it as one, for lack of a better term, plug line item here in resource pool under the employee benefits program. But as we do actuals, that money is dispersed throughout the budget, very similar to the contingency teachers.
Currently, we're still in negotiations with the 3 groups, and we can't determine what that's going to be at this point.
Okay.
But that's our swag. That's our starting salary resource pool.
So that's what the employees' pay increases could be, is what you're attempting to.
That's what we budgeted for it to be. It could be twice that much money. It could be half that much money, depending upon negotiations and things. But that's a pretty good representation of an amount that we believe would be a reasonable.
And then the last thing I do want to talk about is because we constantly hear it, and I just kind of want to get the definition. We always, hear Washington County is a low effort designation. So what is that? What is the definition of a low effort designation?
I gave that information to Mr. Slocum. I'm probably not ready to answer it off the top of my head. I don't know, Eric, can you share your definition of that? Want to ask Tony or David?
Under that provision of the law, which is also known as maintenance of effort escalator provision, the state looks at the various locations, various counties in the city of Baltimore, and you look at how much the state as a whole has increased in wealth. You look at the wealth increases in the local jurisdictions, and you look at what the various county commissioners have done for the school systems in the various counties. And there is a test that says, all right, what did your commissioners provide to the Board of Education? And it has to be a maintenance of effort. And then this escalator provision is based on the wealth. And so there's a test that's it's the lesser of 3 factors: the overall state increase in wealth, the wealth per pupil, the county's wealth per pupil increase, or a statutory 2.5%. And this year, the year that we're talking about, Washington County's wealth per pupil increased 2.7%, but the 2.5% is lesser. So that's what the amount is in the presentation was based on this year.
The year before, the lesser number was the local wealth per student was 1.3%, and the year before that, the lesser was also, the county was, the local wealth per student was 1.4%. So they're looking at those 3 factors. If the county is not keeping up with the rest of the state, you can identify one of those three, and it's the lesser of any one of those 3 numbers. The county increase in local wealth per student, statewide average increase in local wealth per student, or 2.5%. This year was the 2.5% because the local wealth per student went up substantially and the state wealth per student went up substantially this year. I think it's a protection from the state carrying all the burden of state education. As they continue to increase in resources, it's actually to stop counties from just riding the back of the state. It's really what that does.
I guess the reason why I want to make sure this is clear, because I don't think the definition of low effort county actually meets what the maintenance of effort low effort county is. And the reason why I say that is because under your description there, low effort county has nothing to do with what Washington County Board of Education needs. It's based upon the wealth of the individuals and the growth of that wealth, or the growth of the state, or this statutory 2.5%. And if we look at that, do you know how many counties in Washington County or in Maryland are considered a low effort county?
There were 12 this year.
So, and that's what I want to clarify. I don't think we're, as the county commissioner, are underfunding or being low effort, but we're trying to do the best that we can. And we will continue to work on the budget, but I think the designation of this low effort county, I think everybody needs to understand what that actually means.
Yeah, we can read it straight out of Comar, and I won't do that. But it's 13.8.020505 additional maintenance of effort for low effort counties. It is to meet maintenance of effort. It's part of the maintenance of effort law.
I understand, but like what we just were explained, that it has to do with the increase in the wealth of the counties and not actually the need of the Board of Education.
And I think as additional clarification, leave that here a minute. The initial trigger is that it's a 5-year moving average of giving by the county local government to boards of education across the state. So it starts with what is Washington County giving in relation to what all counties are giving to their boards of education. And if you're above that 5-year moving average, the three test rule doesn't apply. It's if you're behind that 5-year moving average of what other jurisdictions are giving their Board of Education that the 3 test moves in. So it really is,
So right, there's a
whether it's the naming, whether we don't like the naming, but the initial trigger is, are you giving to your Board of Education at least that average with what other jurisdictions are giving on a percentage basis?
And again, I think it's a protection of the state to keep the state from carrying the whole ball for increases in education.
Oh, I understand that.
Okay. All right, with that, are there other questions about the operating budget?
I got one more thing.
Okay.
I won't be as hard on you as Court was just now.
Ah, that's not a problem.
But
We want you to
it's just
understand.
something, this is more about the welfare of the students. You got 889 homeless, 416 truant. What is the Washington County Public Schools? I know it's a direct result of probably drugs, opioids, or whatever. So is there something, is that you foresee that costing a lot more money, or what are they doing for the students that are homeless?
Well, our students that are homeless obviously don't have a stable home life for one reason or another. Some of them are living in hotels. Some of them are living with other families. I mean, a big thing we've seen, even for children that aren't homeless, we've seen double and tripled up families in single-family homes or even single family apartments, things like that. All of that is just bringing just a different dynamic to Washington County. I think it's a reflection of our community. I'm not going to say anything bad about our community, but our children are coming, having seen trauma, having seen challenges at home, on the street. And unfortunately, we had an incident just yesterday, and the report that I had was from one of our local club organizations where a whole group of students witnessed a very severe happening in our community. And unfortunately, those things are becoming more common and not less common. So I think those things are just bringing more challenges in. So that's where we're seeing the mental illness. I think the opioid addiction and drugs are serious. What I hear from Meredith and people that work there, the number of babies that are born addicted to alcohol or drugs is just astronomical in Washington County. Those kids are showing up in our schools 4 and 5 years later, and it's getting more challenging. I'm telling you, it's getting more challenging. Talk to teachers. They will tell you, especially particularly those that are closer to the center of the county. They're seeing children they have never seen before. and want to do their absolute best, and I give them all the credit in the world for the accomplishments that they've had. This is a tremendous return on investment, not only our pre-K initiative, but right now in Washington County, the county commissioners are getting a great return on investment for the hard work of our teaching staff, our ESP staff, and our administrators. We are competing. We rank 20th in the state for funding. And that's with all the help that we've had from both the county and the state. We're still just 20th, yet we're far exceeding that in our academic performance. And we're working behind the 8 ball on an awful lot of things, and we need help. Thank you. With that, we'd like to move into the capital budget, and then again, we'll take additional questions.
Well, I'm personally thankful for all the questions because I didn't want to give this after the students spoke because that was a terrible place to be. They were far more engaging than I think I will be. For starters, when we talk about capital, we want to remind the commissioners of the assets that we collectively maintain. We have 49 school facilities, which includes the Center for Education Services and our transportation depot. It covers 1,167 acres and is in excess of 3.5 million square feet. And these are our assets, and they are reflected on your financial statements when you look at the countywide perspective. A reminder, we were here with you in August of 2018 representing our educational facilities master plan. Over the last number of years, we've presented a plan, and we've been looking at a plan that the county has turned around to us with about a 4-year spread between when we are renovating or opening new schools. With the number of facilities we have, it does mean a lengthy span of time, 180 some years between the opening of new schools or when a school opens and is then subsequently renovated. And Dr. Michael has charged staff with coming up with a plan that can shorten that time frame in some way that reflects the number of assets that we do have and looks at saving costs over the long run. So we presented a plan to you that was a prototype design for 3 new schools that replaces 6 of our aging schools. A prototype design works and is a buzz at the state level right now to save money on architectural and engineering fees, but to really pull off a prototype design, those schools do need to be done in rapid succession to recognize that savings. The plan would save $46 million by building the 3 new schools as opposed to renovating the 6, and reduces the funding need for those 6 schools by $31 million. Subsequently to that, when we open a new building, and we will open 1 in place of 2, we can save $1.25 million in operational costs. So again, we're able to funnel some of those savings back into the general fund and hopefully reduce some of the needs we have for general fund expenses moving forward. We would have less buildings to maintain, less acreage to maintain, and we would reduce future staffing needs. Additionally, the county's master plan looks at enrollment, or excuse me, at growth in citizens over the next 10 to 20 years. This plan reduces student capacity by 30% when compared to the 6 schools that they replace, increasing 550 students. So a 30% increase in capacity with only a 6% increase in building area. So the buildings are also much more efficient. This is the plan we presented and staff submitted to your finance office in December of 2018. You can see the spread between the state and the local government, that over the next 6 years through 2025, we'd be looking at approximately $64 million in local funding for our capital improvement plan. Oop, wrong button, excuse me. The county's draft CIP that was presented to you initially on February 12th is a flat funded amount of $4 million over the next 6 years for 24,115. I think the additional 115 in 2020 does reflect additional funding needed to finalize the roof replacement at Boonesboro Elementary, and we do thank you for that support. But you can see the variance of the local funding over the next 6 years that our 2 plans are approximately $40 million apart. Please understand, we recognize at the school system that the county has many competing needs, that funding is finite, but we feel it's imperative to continue to let you know what our needs are. And again, this is infrastructure that truly belongs to the entire county, and want to make sure that everyone is aware of what those needs look like. Our request over the next 6 years itemizes these 6 projects. So you can see Sharpsburg Elementary, which is already underway, is at the top of the list. The 3 replacement schools are highlighted for you in blue. You can see as it relates to the new buildings, you can see the year of when the building was currently opened or last renovated. So for instance, the first school would replace Fountain Rock Elementary that was opened in 1970. So again, you're talking about a school that is coming up on 50 years old. Hickory, built in 1975, so it is 45 years old. Other replacements on that list of note, you know, as you look at Smithsburg High School, that HVAC replacement is original to the school, and it's currently 54 years old. Artificial turf replacement is due at North Hagerstown High School. That is 12 years old. You know, Commissioner Klein, you talked recently about, you know, I think at the Sharpsburg groundbreaking about how you were a student at the new Williamsport High School. We need to do HVAC replacements and electrical distribution replacements, and that school is coming up on 50 years old. It is 49 years old currently.
Thank you for the reminder.
Sorry about that. Based on the funding you've provided, we've redlined out the projects that we could not do over the next 6 years. So we could get into building school 1. We could look at the chiller replacement at North Hagerstown High School. But again, that 60-year-old HVAC system at Smithsburg High School will not be able to be completed. When looking at your CIP draft budget request, we bracketed the funding for elementary school 1, the replacement school that replaces Fountain Rock and Hickory. And the funding is spread out over 5 years. So where we were talking about 180 years, if we are 5 years spread on funding, we might potentially be looking at a 230-year replacement cycle in our schools. Generally speaking, you know, we've talked to you about a 50-year replacement cycle on buildings, and most of our buildings that are in place now were replaced. So when the new Williamsport High School was built, it replaced a building that was about 50 years old. So, you know, we're trying to keep within that plan. And again, we understand the funding is finite, but we're presenting these numbers to you and trying to present what may be a realistic item. Looking at the list again, we said, well, what if we didn't do the new buildings and we only looked at systemic repairs? Let's keep the buildings dry and heated and cooled. What could we do? And we can't even get through all of the systemic needs that we have over the next 6 years. And that also means putting off the replacements to schools that are currently 50 years old. We can't forget then, with those 6 schools, these are upgrades that will need to be done. So systems that are, again, 45 and 50 years old, here's a list of some of the items that can't be done. And as a reminder, several of those schools, 5 of the 6, actually are open school conversions. So as we've talked about school safety over the last year, our open schools are a challenge that we need to address. We have roof replacements and HVAC replacements to keep the students dry and both heated or cooled or at the right appropriate temperature. Lighting upgrades need to be done, and some of those buildings are also not on public water and sewer. If you look at Fountain Rock and Greenbrier, those are well and septic schools that should be addressed. So as we look at, you know, what our request is for capital budget, our request for FY 2020 was $7.9 million. To give you a sense of what that accomplishes, it's $6 million for the Sharpsburg replacement school. It is $552,000 for the Boonesboro Elementary roof and $719,000 for the South Hagerstown High School roof. That project has not yet received funding from the state of Maryland under the IAC's program. We look to resubmit that program, and it would be helpful to have the money from the county in advance of that as a show of good faith to the IAC that the school system and the county are ready and prepared to do that project. Secondly, we're asking that we look at a joint committee between Washington County government and WCPS to really look at our capital improvement program. Again, we want to be cognizant of your needs as a county, but also to make sure that your staff understands what our needs are as well. The county has funded, actually on average by our records, $7.5 million on average over the last 20 years. And to give you a sense of what has been funded, in the 90s we built 8 schools. In the 2000s, we did 7. In 2010, in the 20-teens, we did 4. We're looking at probably 3 schools in the current decade heading into 2020. But that number is declining over time, and that is a concern to us, and we think should be a concern to our community as we look at the aging infrastructure. So we would like to have a conversation jointly with staff on how we can handle that appropriately. And with that, we can handle any questions you have on capital improvement.
I have a few questions, if I may, and this may cross over into the first section, operating budget as well. School safety. Thank you, Dr. Michael and Sheriff Mullendorf, for wanting to re-establish the School Safety Task Force Committee. I know one of the outcomes last year that we had was we provided some capital dollars to help with safety vestibules. Any update? I think there's some projects slated for this summer. Will that complete that obstacle, or are there still more schools to do?
For school vestibules, we'll have all of them complete except Sharpsburg will actually be completed with the new school, and the UIP, Barbara Ingram, will be completed with the completion of that building. Those projects are tied in with that. We're struggling a little bit with one school, just trying to decide whether we need to do a major vestibule project. It's connected to a community center, near a community center that has some challenges. And we're just trying to figure out whether we need to really flip to the other side of the building, which is almost $1 million cost as opposed to about a $250,000 cost. But by the end of this summer, we should be in position of down to just Sharpsburg and Barbara Ingram. And both those right now they don't have a vestibule where someone can come in and be secure, but we do have locked doors. We can see people on camera, and we take additional precautions there. But yes, we are making great progress. As a matter of fact, on next Tuesday's board meeting, there's 2 major awards that are a significant number of the security vestibules. In the last board meeting, the board awarded a security vestibule at Clear Spring Middle School. So those are moving forward, and we appreciate your help.
Very good. I just didn't see that as a line item this year or an area of concern where last year it was up there pretty high. With school resource officers, any insight into legislation that may or be discussed this legislative session with regards to, I know defining an adequate number was a big topic last year. Have we narrowed down any more this year with help from the state?
We've applied for grant funding for, actually paid for part of the security vestibule at Clear Spring Middle School as a result of some of that legislation. We're following potentially a means to be able to secure some resource officers through grant funding, so we'll apply for that if that's eligible. We're keeping up pretty much with all those. There's like different buckets of that state legislative money, and we've been keeping up with application for those various things. Jeff?
And I think, Commissioner, we do have a concern that Senate Bill 1265, as it was passed last year, the Safe to Learn Act, rests determining what is adequate police coverage on the school system. So I think that's what you're referring to, and I think that's still a concern. That is an approach that the school system took through legislation this year. But I don't think we've seen any real response yet back from the state in terms of how they're going to affect that. We truly believe that the law enforcement officials in every community should be determining what adequate coverage is, which goes back to where the funding should lie for school resource officers. Is it right for the Board of Ed to incur that cost when the sheriff's office says, or the city police says, you need more resource officers here? Somewhere along the line, we have to work together on that to determine, if the legislation decides that adequate coverage is determined by the police agency, maybe the funding should be with the police agency as well, but that's continued communication that we have to make those decisions jointly.
Thank you.
There's no further questions. I think Mrs. Williams wants to conclude, or?
Thank you, Dr. Michael. Commissioners, we need your help. This board and the superintendent know what we must do to meet the needs of our students in order to prepare them for their futures. A fully funded Board of Education budget is the help that we need to give the children of our county the sound educational experiences they deserve. At the State of the County presentation, we were pleased to hear each of you say that education is a priority. And by priority, I hope you mean that you want to up your investment in our schools and our children. Your upped investment will pay dividends in the years ahead. We expect outside businesses to invest in the future of Washington County, and I feel that we need to demonstrate we're willing to invest it as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Williams. Thank you. You have anything else to say?
No.
Yeah.
We are behind, so it's up to you. We'd like to go.
No, let's move forward with, we have a presentation too, I believe.
We are slightly behind schedule, but would like to go ahead with this and be as brief as possible. First of all, as a customer with at least 2 students in of the 22,683 students, I couldn't be prouder of the system that they are in and the work that Dr. Michael, Mr. Prue and the board is doing. So thank you very much. We simply wanted to take a few moments with some of the common themes that we're hearing from the Board of Ed and the Board of County Commissioners and weave those in. Some of the things Boyd and I have talked about already. We happened to be out at math counts at the technical high school this Saturday morning. We had a brief discussion then. We've talked the week before. Return on investment is one of Boyd's largest, or ROI themes, and I can say that's one of mine, and it speaks to the Board of County Commissioners as well. Every dollar spent meets a return, and I can't find any exception to that in everything that has been presented to us, both today and just ongoing, being a member of the community as well as hearing this presentation. So please, this is about what we've heard, which is, some of it is challenge, that word came up, complex needs came up, walk alongside us came up from one of the individuals. Trying to do the best that we can, as Commissioner Schmidt mentioned, and up the investment. We want to be clear that we're doing the very best we can with what we have, and I think you'll see that the Board of Education is, in our budget processing that we're doing today, which is going on now, that you are the very first priority here, because the mandates and the requirements are first and foremost what we are looking at, and until we get through those, there won't be anything else to spend money upon. So hopefully the revenues will allow us to get beyond those, but those are the first priority. So you will see that today through here. And if we could go through, the first thing is, I've been asked recently in the community, and I thought this was worth sharing, is that this is largely a state and county funding, and that's what some of this is about, both the state and the county funding, and what the state funding has done to us, both in some state regulation as well as what it's done, reduction in funding through some things you've heard for years about, which highway user revenue funds and that type of thing. So I'm going to turn it over to Sarah, who knows the numbers much better than I do, but we really are simply seeking to make an impression here that we are attempting to give more and more each year, and if there were more to give, would certainly do that. We are doing our best, as I know you are. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. So as you can see on the screen, we do have a pie chart there with the county budget, and you can see that the Board of Ed accounts for 43% of our general fund taxpayer dollars currently. There has been a $2.2 million appropriation more in 2018 and a $1.5 million more in 2019 for the operating budget for the Board of Ed. Approximately $2 million more in 2020 is anticipated based on the maintenance of effort figure that we do have today. And in addition to that, related to capital projects, last year in 2019, $1.2 million more was added for the school safety vestibules, which were discussed earlier. And the overall 10-year plan did increase over the FY18 10-year plan by $4.6 million. So I think that that's something to see as well. Here on this screen, you have the total operating allocation to the Board of Ed. Of course, the number 2020 is the requested amount. On the right chart, we have total funding, including operating and capital. So we can see that those figures for operating have grown from $92.8 million in 2012 to over $100 million in 2020. Again, as Rob discussed, the state does provide a large portion of your budget. Total state dollars contributed to local education is about 18% of their budget. On the right side of the screen, you are probably very familiar with these figures, showing $173 million provided by the state in 2018, $177 in 19, and an estimated $183 million in 2020. Representing about $6 million more in funding. So county's contribution to education isn't limited with just the Board of Ed, of course. About 50% of our budget overall goes to total education efforts, including Hagerstown Community College and certainly funding for the library. along with additional funding for capital school construction projects. We already discussed the maintenance of effort. I did have this slide in here because I did think there was some confusion on that topic. I think that we already discussed that appropriately. It does begin with the state 5-year average of education effort as a benchmark to measure the county against, which then spirals into these different factors that you see on the screen. And here's how maintenance of effort has increased over the years for the county. I do apologize. I think 2020 should be around 100.5, and I think it's shown a little bit differently there. So, but we can see that it has dramatically increased from over the past 9 years. And as Rob mentioned before, the county highway user revenue loss has had a significant impact on county operations, having to supplant those funds with general fund dollars, and only seeing a small increase in those dollars over the past couple years, which we certainly appreciate from the state, but it would help us greatly if we could have restoration of those funds. Again, in front of you, this shows the state contribution to the Board of Ed increasing over the past 9 years, where the county highway user revenue has decreased, has not increased back to even half the level that it once was. So you'll see that the county is trying to meet the needs of the Board of Education, but has these factors to contend with. Again, in highway user revenue, we have lost approximately $7 million per year with a cumulative effect of about $70 million. And I think lastly, to kind of just sum this up, the county, as Rob said, we are currently going through our budget discussions. We have requests that have been submitted from departments. We are going through those requests. One of the first things that we do in our budget process for this year is we've looked at, what was our budget for 2019, and that number was $229.6 million. So what are the mandates that we have? Well, 2 of the known mandates, of course, maintenance of effort for the Board of Education, and then certain obligations that we have here, including debt service. So those are the 2 numbers that you see on the screen. Those do not represent all of our mandates that we are faced with, but we wanted to provide this brief snapshot to show that we understand we have at least these mandates, and our available 2020 revenues are at a minimum of 230.8 today. That number could increase slightly. It is not expected or anticipated to increase largely. So we are working through our budget, and more will be presented on the budget on March 5th for our general fund operating budget to see the general fund revenue number that we will have on that day. But please understand that those mandates in front of you present a larger amount than the additional revenue that you see on the screen.
So with that, we wanted to lay out a very clear process for everyone, including both boards, that this is our funding. This mandate is certainly required and will be fully met. There's no question about it. So as far as that goes, it is a priority. We may be looking at level funding for all budgets in our operations, all other agencies, simply to meet that mandate with the existing revenue. And that is very important to know that state funding may go up for Board of Ed, but it is certainly decreasing, has decreased by about $70 million for Washington County Board of County Commissioners, and that was used for infrastructure and other things, but it has required us to completely realign our budgets over the past decade or so. So again, this is an information we can continue this conversation at staff level, and will, I'm sure. We want to do the very best we can with the Board of Ed and with you, Dr. Michael, of course. So we feel, as you do, that information is the most powerful tool to get to the best collaborative end. So I wanted to share this with you. Thank you.
Sarah
A little over $1 million right now. There are some other revenue figures that are kind of going to come in at the end of the month that will help us further project for 2020, but right now they're about 1.3 million over what was budgeted for FY19.
Okay, and how much of that have we earmarked for the Board of Education?
Well, right now we have a maintenance of effort of 1.9 to meet, and we have that revenue increase of 1.3. So there's additional work to be done.
And I noticed on the slide there, you talked about employee step increases. That's Washington County.
That is correct.
Absorb that.
At this point, Vice President Baker,
We were giving a percent raise.
at this point, President Baker, we have to get to step 2 and meet those to be level funded, and that's our challenge right now. We're at step 2 currently, so we haven't gone to step 3, which is safety critical. I will be working closely with Sarah and other staff to try to get to step 3. Obviously, we can't stop short of safety critical measures. And then step 4 is to do everything we can to get an employee step, but we're not there yet. This is still February.
Numbers 2.5%, 3.5%.
We were hoping for either a 2.5 or a 3.5 step, depending on, we've had other discussions related to employee steps in the past month or so. So we, in the budget office, we did project a number for that. However, we're not there. We cannot fund that at this time.
Okay, any other questions, commissioners? Please do, President Williams.
Yes, thank you. I have a question with regard to step 2, where it says fund mandates. Could you elaborate on that, please? What you're considering mandates?
Well, certain mandates considered would, of course, be the maintenance of effort number that you see there, debt service, other mandated costs such as contract increases that we are aware of that are coming.
Would you be including within that term mandates the low effort that you have to pay us at the end of each year, or that you've had to add to our funding each year? Would that be considered a mandate?
That is related to the 2.5 million that was discussed previously. So that 2.5 million less the 490 is the 1.9, and that is included.
So that would be considered a mandate?
Yes, ma'am.
So the plan then is not to ever not have that low effort tag, but consider as a mandate at the end of each year 1.9 or 2.5 million or whatever it might be for that year.
I think that would be a question.
This is Ms. Williams, this is a step process, so certainly through the step 2 would be, yes, that's the minimum. However, there are 3 more steps. Going to step 5 is to other departments and agencies, so we would very much like to, once we get through safety critical and the other similar raises to what the Board of Ed gets, we would like to get to step 5 and exceed that. So please don't read this the wrong way, that the Board of Ed funding in all instances stops at step 2. But we know that we can't go any further until we get through step 2. That's where we are. And right now we're at step 2. Very much would like to get to step 5 where we can increase above and beyond, but we're not there with the current revenue sources. And that's what we wanted to be clear right now, is we are at step 2. This year, if we can get beyond, we will certainly look at it. The commissioners have approached us to try to get there and to get more done, whether it's SROs or early education. Certainly heard that message, and we are trying to get through step 3, step 4 to step 5, where we can do more than simply with what is required. I hope that helps.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions, comments?
I have a question, maybe for our county staff. One of the asks that came before us, and certainly it's important, school resource officers. Are we considering school resource officers under step 3? If there's a critical need?
So safety critical is what is required. For instance, we are seeing multi-millions of dollars in fire and emergency services being required. SROs, safety resource officers, is also on that same list. That is certainly one of the priorities of the commissioners. So as we work through the operational budget, we will have to have those discussions with the commissioners in this very venue.
So step 3 is all operational cost?
No. Step 3 is safety critical. So in other words, if there is something and the board deems that SROs, along with emergency services, along with fire and safety, which you will be hearing about this evening at our 6 o'clock evening meeting, your Director of Emergency Services, Mr. Hayes, will present the needs there. That's what we're considering step 3, safety critical. We have heard from
School resource officers would be an operational cost.
an operational cost. Yeah, please try not to break down operational versus CIP. Step 3 could be either a CIP cost or an operational cost. It's whatever is absolutely critical.
Is that being, any of that being requested from anybody across the county for operational costs?
Which money?
The speed camera revenue is partly, part of that is going to the capital projects fund to provide for public safety needs on the capital side, one being the public fire safety emergency.
Public safety training.
Public safety training center. The speed camera revenue has seen a reduction in FY 2020 revenues due to not realizing.
Has any of the other county departments or anyone requested any of that speed camera money to be used in
I think 3 towns
I believe
received
we did.
funds, didn't they?
The county does pay for deputy costs related to some patrolling for the towns, I think 2 or 3 towns.
So William, it totaled 145,000.
But those funds are currently being used for both operating and capital costs. There are no remaining funds available to be reallocated.
And to answer your question entirely accurately, I believe the Board of Ed has approached requesting funds from those speed camera revenues as well.
Last year.
But we're using some speed camera revenue for operational costs, right?
That's correct.
Some for CIP.
That's correct.
Because I know, and maybe this takes the conversation into a different subject, but I know when speed camera revenues were first proposed, we earmarked that in public, during public comments, that the gist of that would be because it was a declining revenue source. We didn't want to attribute any of that to operational costs. I know our request of the Board of Ed was school resource officers at the time. And we were rather emphatic as saying, well, that's a declining revenue source. It's not something that we can guarantee long-term. And as we can see in year 2, 3 that we're in now, obviously it's declining. If we're using it for operational costs, might there be an opportunity to assist, and maybe with the understanding that it is declining, it's not guaranteed, but in the short term, if we're going to use it in the short term, is there an opportunity to split some of that with the school board so they can use it in the short term as well?
The commissioners can certainly decide to do that. However, we will have to meet the requirements of the sheriff in another way, so we will have to cut another program, some other location to meet those requests, as well as perhaps the towns that have been offered, as has been brought up, offered the service due to the speed camera money. So unfortunately, we're in a negative right now. So any additional service provided will require a further cut in some other fund.
I understand. I just don't think we should have been put in that situation where we were using it for operational costs when we know at some point, whether we cut it now or cut it 3 years down the road when it levels off and it's much less. At some point, we're going to cut.
Excuse me?
We have to break down as to how much of that, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, that's fine.
How much of that speed camera money is currently being used for operations?
I can certainly get that to you.
Yeah, that was begun and initiated when the board approved it back in, I believe, calendar year 2017, and it was begun for operations perhaps as early as the fiscal year 2018. And that was done under the approved budget, and it was done very similarly for the towns, which are operational costs for the towns. So,
Commissioners, any other thoughts? Yes, any other thoughts, comments? Heartfelt thank you all
Thank
for
you very
coming in
much.
today.
Thank you.
Motion go into closed session. Do I have a second?